Have you ever found yourself trapped in a cycle of debt, not knowing how to get out? Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with your heart racing, thinking about how you're going to pay next month's bills? Have you ever felt so pressured that it seemed there was no way out, as if the weight of the entire world was on your shoulders? This is the reality for millions of people, but today's story is different. It's the story of James Miller, an ordinary man, a father, who one day found himself suffocated by debts that grew larger every month. James wasn't lazy or irresponsible. On the contrary, he worked hard, did overtime, and tried in every way to provide a decent life for his wife and 2 children. Yet, no matter what he did, it never seemed enough. The harder he fought, the deeper he seemed to sink. Desperation took over. With every call from the bank, every collection letter that arrived in the mail, James's heart seemed to shrink. He felt like a failure as a man, as a husband, as a father. Can you imagine how that erodes self-esteem? How devastating it is to look into the eyes of your family and feel like you're failing. But here's the surprising part. James didn't find the solution in a miraculous loan, a raise, or a winning lottery ticket. He discovered something much more powerful, something that had been inside him all along. What if I told you that James got out of debt using only his mind? Sounds impossible, right? Almost like an illusion? That's exactly what makes this story so transformative. At the peak of his despair, James stumbled, almost by accident, upon a forgotten book in a community library. A simple book, but one that spoke about something he had never taken seriously: gratitude. Words that seemed trivial began to awaken a new perspective inside him. He read stories of people who had changed their lives simply by changing the way they thought and felt. At first, James doubted. How could he feel grateful when everything around him seemed to be falling apart? How could he feel gratitude if the rent was overdue, the fridge nearly empty, and the phone rang every day with bills? But for some reason, he decided to try. And that attempt changed everything. In the next chapters of this story, you'll discover exactly how James used the power of the mind to climb out of the debt hole. You'll learn step by step how he applied gratitude, how it transformed the way he thought, and how the universe seemed to respond to his new vibrations. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't a theory, nor an empty promise. It's a real account from someone who went through darkness, faced despair, and with a simple shift in consciousness, ignited a light that completely transformed his life. And the question that remains for you is, if James could do it, why couldn't you? James Miller had always believed that hard work was the answer to everything. From a young age, he learned from his father that a real man supports his family with the sweat of his brow. And he took it seriously. He worked in a mechanic's shop from morning to night, even taking extra jobs on weekends to make a little extra money. But despite all his dedication, the bills never stopped piling up. At first, they were small debts: a credit card used to buy clothes for the children, a personal loan to fix the car, a late mortgage payment that went from 1 month to 2. James would tell himself, "Next month I'll get everything in order." But the next month always arrived with more bills, more interest, more pressure. The letters with overdue notices began to fill the mailbox. Every time the phone rang, James's heart raced, afraid it was another demand. He tried to stay calm in front of his wife, but inside he felt an overwhelming weight. It was as if he were carrying a mountain on his back, and there was no one to help. His wife, Laura, tried to be understanding, but she couldn't hide her worry. At night, after the kids were asleep, they would sit at the kitchen table to figure out how to pay the basics: rent, electricity, food. Often, they had to decide what could wait. Each of these decisions further eroded James's confidence as a provider. He began to lose sleep. He would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, imagining terrible scenarios: eviction, his children going without, the collapse of everything he had built with so much effort. During the day, he was exhausted, irritable, and low on energy. Even moments of joy with his family became rare because his mind was always occupied with fear and worry. It was during this period that James reached his limit. One day, leaving the shop, he received a harsh call from the bank. If he didn't pay part of his debt within a week, he risked losing the house. He hung up, got in the car, and sat in silence for long minutes. The feeling was defeat. "I've failed. I'm not enough," he thought. And it was in this state, between held-back tears and a sense of emptiness, that something unexpected happened. That night, just trying to escape his own thoughts, James wandered into a small community library near his home. Walking aimlessly between the shelves, his eyes fell upon an old book, its cover worn, with a simple title, "The Power of Gratitude." He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to take it. He had no intention of changing anything with it. He just wanted to distract his mind. Little did he know that those pages would become the turning point of his entire life.
The book James took home that night didn't seem extraordinary at all. The pages were yellowed with age, and the cover was almost falling apart. But as he began to read, something inside him was touched in a different way. The author wrote simply, directly, almost as if speaking to him. The message was clear. Change in your life begins with changing your thoughts. The key is gratitude. James frowned as he read those words. Gratitude? How could he feel grateful when he was about to lose his house, when he could barely put food on the table? It almost seemed like a bad joke. He remembered the bank calls, his worried wife, the bills stacked in the kitchen drawer. Grateful for what? He thought with irony. But as he continued reading, something caught his attention. The author said that gratitude is not just about what you have, but about how you choose to see your reality. That even in the midst of chaos, there is always something, no matter how small, to be thankful for. And that this simple act changes the frequency of your thoughts, opening the way for new opportunities. James closed the book, leaned back in his chair, and fell silent. He had never thought this way before. He had been so focused on what was missing, on what he couldn't achieve, that he had perhaps never stopped to acknowledge the little he already had. Still, resistance was strong. "This won't pay my debts. This won't solve anything," he muttered. But that night, before going to sleep, he decided to try. He grabbed a scrap of paper and wrote down 3 things he could feel grateful for. It was difficult. He stared into space for minutes, trying to think of something. Finally, almost embarrassed, he wrote, "My wife and children are with me. We still have a roof over our heads. I have my health to keep working." They were simple words, but somehow they eased the weight on his chest. For the first time in a long time, James slept without feeling crushed by fear. In the following days, he repeated the exercise. At first, mechanically, without much belief. But gradually, he began to notice a subtle change within himself. When he thought of gratitude, he felt a spark of hope. And that spark was enough to get him out of bed with a little more energy. One moment marked this early phase. One day, coming home from work, he saw his children playing in the yard with an old patched-up ball. In the past, he would have felt sad for not being able to buy a new one. But for the first time, he smiled at their joy and silently gave thanks for that moment. It was then that he realized gratitude didn't need perfect conditions to exist. James was still far from understanding the real power he was awakening. The depths were still there, the problems still existed, but something inside him was beginning to change. And this change would be the first step toward an unimaginable transformation.
After that first experience, James realized something was shifting within him. It wasn't a drastic change, but a light feeling, as if the weight he carried had eased just a little. And that small relief was enough for him to decide to persist. Every night before going to sleep, he would take the same makeshift notebook and write down 3 reasons for gratitude. At first, they were always the same: family, the roof over his head, his health. But over time, he began to notice new details. The simple meal on his plate, his wife's smile when he came home, a client paying on time at the shop, even the hot coffee in the early morning. These small notes began to form a habit. James realized that throughout the day, his mind started looking for reasons to be grateful. It was as if he had changed the lens through which he viewed life. Instead of focusing on what was missing, he began to notice what was already there. And it was in this process that something remarkable began to happen. Situations that would have gone unnoticed started to turn into opportunities. A client at the shop, satisfied with the service, referred James to a friend who owned a fleet of vehicles. Suddenly, a contract appeared that brought an unexpected flow of income. Laura, his wife, also noticed the change. The husband who used to come home tired and silent was now lighter, more willing to talk. The children noticed the difference and seemed even closer to him. It wasn't that the problems had disappeared, but James was reacting in a new way, and that changed the entire family atmosphere. He also created a new morning routine. Before leaving for work, he would spend a few minutes in silence, breathing deeply and quietly repeating, "Thank you for this new day. Thank you because there is always a way out. Thank you because I am already on my path to victory." These words became like invisible fuel. James began to realize that it wasn't just about writing or saying gratitude, but feeling it. Every time he spoke these phrases, he tried to imagine the feeling of already being free from debt, of seeing his family safe, of living in peace. He closed his eyes and pictured a different future, believing for a few moments that it was already real. And it was exactly at this point that the transformation began to gain momentum. Gradually, James noticed that his energy attracted different situations. The bank, which had seemed relentless, called offering a debt renegotiation under lighter conditions. A childhood friend whom he hadn't seen in years approached him for a business partnership. Small doors began to open, as if the universe was responding to the new frequency at which he was vibrating. Of course, the debts didn't disappear overnight. There was still much to pay, much to reorganize. But now, instead of feeling despair, James felt hope. And that hope was so powerful that it turned into action. He worked more efficiently, made calmer decisions, and saw solutions where before he only saw problems. James was beginning to understand that gratitude wasn't just a mental exercise. It was a key capable of changing his perspective, his energy, and consequently his reality. And little did he know, this was only the beginning. When James began to feel the first signs of change, he believed that from then on, everything would be easier. But life, as always, had other plans. It was as if the universe wanted to test his new mindset, to see if the transformation was real or just a fleeting enthusiasm. A few weeks after securing the contract with the fleet of vehicles, one of the cars developed a serious problem, and the client, frustrated, threatened to cancel the deal. The workshop was crowded, the employees stressed, and James felt that old pressure in his chest again. He thought, "It's always like this. Just when it seems I'm about to improve, something goes wrong." For a moment, the old voice of despair tried to dominate his mind. But this time, he had a different resource. James took a deep breath, went to the workshop bathroom, closed the door, and, alone, repeated, "Thank you because even this has a purpose. Thank you because everything works for my good. Thank you because I am learning to trust." Those minutes were intense, almost an internal battle. But when he returned, he was calmer. He spoke with the client, offered to repair the vehicle without charging for labor, and, to his surprise, the man not only accepted but praised his honest approach. The contract was kept, and James gained even more credibility. This episode marked a turning point. He realized that gratitude wasn't meant to be practiced only when everything was going well, but especially when everything seemed to be falling apart. It was in those moments that the choice to be grateful held the greatest power. Soon after, another test came his way. Laura, his wife, fell ill and needed a few days of rest. Household chores piled up, the children demanded more attention, and James felt overwhelmed. In the past, he would have reacted with impatience, complaining about his bad luck. But now, although tired, he chose to see the situation through a different lens. Thank you because I have the chance to care for her. Thank you because my children are here with me. Thank you because this phase will also pass. And indeed, it did pass. Laura recovered quickly, and that period of difficulty brought the family even closer. James felt that by choosing gratitude instead of complaining, he was strengthening not only himself, but also those around him. But the greatest test was still to come. One morning, he received a legal notice. Part of his debt had been sent for judicial collection. The risk of losing the house was real. The shock was devastating. James spent hours sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the paper, hands trembling. Everything he had worked for could collapse. He could have given in to panic. He could have abandoned his gratitude practice, telling himself it didn't work. But in that moment, he remembered the words he had been repeating every morning. Thank you because there is always a way out. Holding the notice in his hands, he decided not to let fear take control. He said a prayer of gratitude, even without knowing how things would be resolved. And something extraordinary happened. The next day, a former client approached him with a work proposal large enough to cover exactly the amount the bank demanded that month. James was amazed. It wasn't a coincidence. To him, it was confirmation that when he chose to trust and give thanks, the universe moved in his favor. The tests didn't stop, but with each challenge, he grew stronger. He learned that gratitude didn't eliminate problems, but it transformed him to face them differently. And that shift in attitude made all the difference. He also created a new morning routine. Before leaving for work, he would spend a few minutes in silence, breathing deeply and quietly repeating, "Thank you for this new day. Thank you because there is always a way out. Thank you because I am already on my path to victory." These words became like invisible fuel. James began to realize that it wasn't just about writing or saying gratitude, but feeling it. Every time he spoke these phrases, he tried to imagine the feeling of already being free from debt, of seeing his family safe, of living in peace. He closed his eyes and pictured a different future, believing for a few moments that it was already real. And it was exactly at this point that the transformation began to gain momentum. Gradually, James noticed that his energy attracted different situations. The bank, which had seemed relentless, called offering a debt renegotiation under lighter conditions. A childhood friend, whom he hadn't seen in years, approached him for a business partnership. Small doors began to open, as if the universe was responding to the new frequency at which he was vibrating. Of course, the debts didn't disappear overnight. There was still much to pay, much to reorganize. But now, instead of feeling despair, James felt hope. And that hope was so powerful that it turned into action. He worked more efficiently, made calmer decisions, and saw solutions where before he only saw problems. James was beginning to understand that gratitude wasn't just a mental exercise. It was a key capable of changing his perspective, his energy, and consequently, his reality. And little did he know, this was only the beginning. When James began to feel the first signs of change, he believed that from then on, everything would be easier. But life, as always, had other plans. It was as if the universe wanted to test his new mindset, to see if the transformation was real or just a fleeting enthusiasm. A few weeks after securing the contract with the fleet of vehicles, one of the cars developed a serious problem, and the client, frustrated, threatened to cancel the deal. The workshop was crowded, the employees stressed, and James felt that old pressure in his chest again. He thought, "It's always like this. Just when it seems I'm about to improve, something goes wrong." For a moment, the old voice of despair tried to dominate his mind. But this time, he had a different resource. James took a deep breath, went to the workshop bathroom, closed the door, and alone repeated, "Thank you, because even this..."
After facing those tests and realizing that gratitude truly made a difference in his life, James decided he would no longer treat this practice as a simple exercise, but as a way of life. It wasn't just a nightly habit or a morning repetition. It was a new way of seeing the world. He began to notice that gratitude was shaping not only his emotions, but also his choices and actions. Before, he made decisions driven by fear, accepting any contract out of desperation, overworking without planning, spending energy on quick fixes that didn't solve the problem permanently. Now, with a calmer and more positive mind, he acted with clarity. A remarkable example was when a supplier offered him a deal that seemed advantageous but carried high risk. James, in another time, would have accepted without thinking, just to try to make money quickly. But now, instead of acting out of anxiety, he paused, took a deep breath, went through his gratitude routine, and asked for clarity. The answer came as intuition. It wasn't the right moment. He declined. Months later, he learned that the supplier had gone bankrupt, leaving huge debts for other local businesses. This discernment was new to him. It was as if gratitude had sharpened his perception, allowing him to see beyond appearances. Laura, his wife, also noticed the transformation. "You're different, James, calmer, more present. Even your gaze has changed," she said one evening as they talked after dinner. He smiled and replied, "It's not that the problems disappeared, Laura. I just learned to see them differently." And the tangible results began to multiply. That partnership with the former client expanded and brought new referrals. The workshop, previously financially tight, began to have a more stable cash flow. With this, James was able to renegotiate part of his debts under lighter terms. The bank, which had once been merely an enemy, began to treat him with respect for his punctuality in the new installments. More than that, he began to attract people and situations aligned with the new energy he was emitting. A neighbor, impressed with his dedication, offered volunteer help with some workshop renovations. An employee, inspired by James' attitude, brought ideas that increased the business's productivity. It was as if everything around him started to conspire for growth. But perhaps the greatest achievement wasn't in the bank account numbers. It was inside James. He no longer felt like a failure. He no longer looked in the mirror with shame. On the contrary, he felt proud to be changing not only his finances, but his inner life. Every morning, while repeating his gratitude routine, he imagined his family living in abundance, the house paid off, the children growing up safely and happily. And the more he connected with this vision, the more real it seemed. James understood that gratitude was not just a passing feeling. It was a creative force capable of shaping his reality from the inside out. He no longer doubted. He was on the right path, and nothing could stop him. James's life began to show clear signs of transformation. What once seemed like a tunnel with no exit now opened up as a path illuminated by new possibilities. What had changed? It wasn't a sudden salary increase, nor an unexpected inheritance. It was something much more powerful. His mind, his vibration, his energy. By practicing gratitude daily, James began to live in a state of trust, and this state attracted opportunities that he might not have even noticed otherwise. One of the major turning points happened in a simple, almost casual way. A local businessman, owner of a small taxi fleet, came to the workshop to repair a car. James attended to him attentively, listening patiently to every detail of the problem. But beyond fixing the vehicle, he offered solutions for preventive maintenance, showing how the man could save money in the long run. The businessman was impressed not only with the service, but also with James's demeanor, calm, confident, different from most people. Days later, the man returned with an unexpected proposal. He wanted James to take care of his entire fleet. It was a fixed monthly contract that would ensure a steady flow of income. For someone who had spent years suffocated by debt, it felt like a divine gift. James accepted, feeling in his heart that it was yet another answer from the universe to his gratitude practice. And it didn't stop there. Satisfied clients began recommending his services to other businesses. And in a short time, the workshop, once almost on the verge of bankruptcy, was full of cars every day. James had to hire 2 extra assistants to handle the demand. The money that barely covered the bills before now started to accumulate. He was able to pay overdue installments, renegotiate old debts, and even save a small amount for emergencies. For the first time in years, he opened the kitchen drawer without feeling that knot in his stomach caused by bills and collection letters. The drawer, once a symbol of fear, was now just an ordinary place, without emotional weight. But perhaps most importantly, James realized that his transformation was not only material. He began to live more lightly. The anxiety that had accompanied him daily was replaced by a sense of confidence. With every unexpected situation, instead of thinking the worst, he took a deep breath and gave thanks, and surprisingly, solutions always appeared. A clear example was when the workshop's alignment machine broke down. Previously, this would have caused despair. After all, without it, he would lose clients. But James, instead of complaining, told himself, "Thank you because even this will be resolved. Thank you because there is always a way." 2 days later, a supplier offered a used machine in excellent condition for far less than usual. It was exactly what he needed. In James's eyes, none of this was a coincidence. It was confirmation that his gratitude vibration was shaping every aspect of his life. He wasn't just getting out of debt, he was building a new future based on abundance. Laura, his wife, also flourished alongside him. Without the constant weight of worry, she began to smile frequently again. The children, who had once felt their parents' tension, now lived in a lighter home, full of hope. The entire family was being transformed simply because James had decided to change the way he thought. What began as a hesitant exercise of writing 3 things to be grateful for on a scrap of paper was now becoming a life revolution. James understood once and for all that the mind is the seed of all change. And that seed, watered every day with gratitude, was finally beginning to bear abundant fruit.
When James looked back, he could hardly believe he was the same man from months before. That desperate father who couldn't sleep thinking about debts was now living a phase of expansion. It wasn't just about paying bills, it was about creating a new life. With the workshop constantly growing, James decided to invest in improvements. He renovated the space, bought modern tools, and trained his employees to provide exceptional service. His vision was no longer survival, but prosperity. He kept repeating to himself, "Thank you, because my business thrives every day. Thank you, because abundance flows to me with ease." These words weren't just empty phrases, they were affirmations shaping his state of mind. And as a result, the results kept coming. In a short time, he closed contracts with 2 more local companies. The flow of individual clients also increased as the workshop became recognized as a reference in the city. Laura, his wife, was moved by the transformation. One day she said, "James, I never imagined we'd get this far. Not just because the debts are paid, but because of the way you've changed. You've become a lighter, more present, more confident man." James smiled and replied, It all started when I decided to be grateful. I had nothing but problems, but I realized that if I focused on the little I had, I would make room for the abundance that was coming. And indeed, that's how it was. What had once seemed impossible now felt natural. He paid off most of the debts, and the few that remained no longer scared him, as he knew he could handle them. The drawer full of collection letters became an organized folder with paid receipts. Each paid bill was a symbol of victory, and he made sure to give thanks aloud for every achievement. But the impact of James's transformation didn't stop with his family. People around him began to notice the change. Friends and neighbors who had known him as the man buried in debt now saw him prospering. Many asked what his secret was. James didn't talk about magic formulas or financial tricks. He simply said, "I changed my mind. I discovered the power of gratitude." This simple phrase sparked curiosity. Some began to practice it themselves. A colleague at the workshop, inspired by James, started writing daily reasons for gratitude. A neighbor who had constantly complained about life's difficulties decided to try the exercise of giving thanks for small things. Gradually, James's transformation began to spread, like a flame that lights others. Over time, the workshop grew so much that James needed to rent a larger space. It was something he had never dared to dream of when buried in debt. Now he not only had the financial means, but also the confidence to expand. And at every step, he made sure to give thanks. Before signing contracts, before buying new machines, before hiring new employees. Gratitude was the invisible foundation of all his prosperity. James understood that getting out of debt wasn't the final destination. It was only the beginning of a much larger journey. He had discovered abundance, not only in money, but in life as a whole. Abundance of peace, joy, and stronger relationships. And every night before going to sleep, he still opened his old notebook. Today, the gratitude lists were long, full of achievements, but he never forgot to write the first three. My family, our home, my health. Because it was starting with these three simple reasons that his entire life had changed. On that quiet night, after signing the contract with tears in his eyes, David couldn't sleep. It wasn't anxiety nor fear. It was gratitude. For the first time in years, he truly felt in control of his own life. But there was still something inside him that needed to be understood. How had a mind that once saw only debt and failure now transformed into a source of prosperity? It was in the early hours, sitting on the small porch of his house, gazing at the starry sky, that David realized the true turning point. He had changed from the inside before his reality could change on the outside. For years, his mind had been programmed to think in scarcity, overdue bills, and defeat. Every thought he nurtured reinforced a cycle that seemed impossible to break. But when he decided, even without money, to feel rich on the inside, something began to shift. He started walking tall, looking at people with confidence, and giving thanks even for the smallest things. This energy changed the way the world responded to him. The universe simply reflected back what he had begun to believe was true. And it was at this point that David understood it wasn't just about earning money or paying off debts. It was about becoming a new person. Where he once carried the weight of despair, he now carried the lightness of faith. Where he once asked for help with shame, he now offered opportunities to others. Where his life once seemed a dead end, it now became a road full of possibilities. A few days later, another contract appeared. This time, he didn't seek the client found him through an unexpected referral. It was as if invisible doors were opening one after another. And each new opportunity seemed to confirm the truth he had discovered. The mind creates before life materializes. David began teaching this to his children in a simple way, like telling a bedtime story. He said, "Never let fear decide for you.
always choose gratitude, even when everything seems against you. The universe responds to what you truly feel. His young children absorbed every word with bright eyes. To them, their father was not just a man who got out of debt. He was living proof that the impossible can become reality. Over time, debt stopped being a shadow, not just because it was paid off, but because it no longer had power over him. The mind that once produced worry now produced confidence, ideas, solutions, and hope. And in this process, David realized something greater. He hadn't just changed his life, he had changed the lives of everyone around him. His wife, once tired and worried, now radiated joy. His children would grow up in a home of hope, not fear. Even friends began to see him as an inspiration. The turning point wasn't a check, nor a contract, nor a magical solution. The real turning point was the decision to live first in a state of gratitude, even when nothing had yet changed. This lesson would remain etched in his life forever. The mind is the seed of everything.
Today, James Miller looks at his life and can barely recognize the man he once was. The debts that once suffocated him have been paid. The workshop, once on the verge of collapse, is now a thriving business full of clients and opportunities. But the most important thing isn't money or success. It's the inner transformation that made all of this possible. He learned that true wealth is not in the bank account, but in the mind and the heart. That gratitude isn't just an exercise in words, but a practice that changes perception, energy, and, consequently, reality. That believing in possibilities, even when everything seems lost, opens doors that were once invisible. James shares his story to inspire others to see beyond difficulties. He knows that many, like him, live suffocated by fear and debt, and that often the difference between remaining in scarcity and living in abundance lies in choosing to be grateful before having something material, trusting before seeing results, and keeping the mind focused on what one wishes to create. Today, as he walks through the workshop, James smiles, seeing motivated employees, satisfied clients, and his happy family. He remembers the nights he cried alone in the kitchen, imagining he would never escape the pressure of bills. And he realizes that every tear, every fear, every doubt was, in fact, a seed that gave rise to the strength he cultivated through the practice of gratitude. He also notices the impact he can have on others. Friends, neighbors, and clients begin to seek James not just for repairs and services, but to hear his story, learn how to apply gratitude, and transform their own lives. His experience shows that one doesn't need to wait for an external solution to change. Change begins from the inside out. James also teaches his children that no matter what challenges arise, they always have the choice to change the way they see the world. That being grateful, even when everything seems difficult, is a superpower capable of opening unexpected paths. And that trusting themselves and the flow of the universe is as essential as any physical or material effort. In the end, James's story isn't just about getting out of debt. It's about discovering the power of the mind, the strength of gratitude, and the ability to transform one's life. It's about proving that when someone chooses to see beyond fear, recognize the value of what they already have, and maintain a positive mindset, everything can change in extraordinary ways. James became a living example that it's possible to rise from despair and create a life of abundance using only the mind. And what began as 3 simple reasons to be grateful transformed into a life philosophy capable of generating tangible results, happiness, and lasting prosperity. And the message he leaves for all of us is clear. Don't wait for life to change to be grateful. Be grateful, and life will change. The power is within you. If this story touched you, leave a comment below sharing your biggest challenge and how you plan to apply gratitude in your life.
And don't forget to click on the next video on the end screen to discover other real-life stories of transformation with the law of attraction. You'll be amazed at the power the mind has to change everything.